They didn't need evidence to see me as guilty. Just my skin, my silence, and a uniform that made him more uncomfortable than safe. I walked into that courtroom not like a man about to defend himself, more like a man who already knew the verdict. You could feel it. The way the bailiff's stare stuck to me a little too long. How the judge didn't even glance up when I entered, just scribbled like he was crossing me out of a script he wrote before I ever showed up. The room wasn't quiet from respect. It was waiting for me to fail, to lash out, to confirm every unspoken fear packed into that fancy wood-paneled box. But I didn't give him that. Just walked in. No entourage, no medals, gray suit, polished shoes, and a silence I'd worn like armor since Fallujah. Judge Whitmore finally looked at me. Not like a man looking at another man, but like a mechanic sizing up a busted part. "Mr. Dawson," he said, "decorated Navy SEAL, huh? One would expect better judgment." That was his way of reminding everyone I wasn't here as a veteran. I was here as a threat. Then came Officer Dwyer. Pressed uniform, polished lies. He stood there, calm as day, saying I was aggressive, unstable, that I shoved him during booking. No witnesses, no bruises, no camera footage, just his word. And in that room, his word weighed more than my entire military record that I didn't say much. Didn't need to. Just looked at the space between us and said, "I never touched him." You'd think that would matter. It didn't. The judge waved it off, mumbled about letting the evidence speak. But there was no evidence. His body cam? Corrupted. Security footage? Unavailable. It was my word against his, and I was already losing. Then came the request to restrain me, right there in court. I hadn't moved, hadn't raised my voice, but Dwyer claimed I looked emotionally unstable. Judge granted it with a single word, just like that, like he was flicking lint off his robe. But I didn't flinch. I stood, calm, deliberate, extended my wrists like I'd done it 100 times. The sound of cuffs in a courtroom, it cuts deeper than a gavel. A woman in the back couldn't take it. She stood and shouted, "You're really gonna sit there and act like this is normal?" And that cracked something. In the air. In the story they were trying to tell. I looked at her, gave a small nod. Not gratitude, not pity, just acknowledgement. Then I turned back to the judge and said, "You're not restraining me. You're just comforting yourselves. You ever watch a room, try not to breathe?" That was the moment. Then it shifted. A voice from the back whispered, "Out there, he was a hero. Back home, they call him a threat." That's when she walked in, Dr. Nia Ellis. Calm, holding a black drive. "This court hasn't seen all the footage," she said. Her ex-husband served with Dwyer. Before his death, he'd archived everything. Backups the department tried to erase. She had it. Timestamped. Verified. Real. Judge tried to shut her down. Chain of custody. Procedure. But my lawyer, who had barely spoken all morning, stood up and quoted federal evidence rules, voice trembling but firm. Said the footage was valid and denying it would be, well, dishonest. And finally, for the first time that day, the judge hesitated. Then came the footage. There I was, seated in the precinct hallway, calm. Dwyer stormed in, yelling, pacing, jabbing a finger in my face. Slammed the wall beside my head. No audio yet, but the rage spoke for itself. Then the sound kicked in. His words burned. "You think wearing that uniform makes you more than me? You don't know your place." I didn't stand. Didn't even raise a hand. Just looked at him and said, "You don't own me. Not out there. Not in here." He shoved me. Chair hit the floor. I never fought back. Just took it. When it ended, the courtroom didn't cheer. No one clapped. But something had scorched the air. Whitmore recessed the court, his voice thin, unsure. I looked at him for the first time, not with anger, with truth. "You don't want the truth," I said. "You want surrender, and I don't owe you that." That's when it started unraveling that a man at the back stood, gray suit, hadn't spoken all day, left without a word. Judge noticed, paled, fumbled with his notes, tried to act like he was still in control. He wasn't. 15 minutes later, a young man in uniform brought a sealed envelope from the Department of Defense. My lawyer opened it. The room shifted again. "Your Honor," he said, Mr. Dawson is currently protected under active operations clearance. All charges are to be dismissed immediately. Whitmore's face lost all its arrogance. He tried to speak, but his mouth moved before his voice did. This proceeding is concluded. That was all he had left that I didn't move. Didn't smile. Just nodded once. That was enough. As I walked out. Quiet, slow, deliberate. People stood. Not out of obligation. Out of recognition. Veterans. Reporters. Strangers. They stood not because I won, but because they finally saw what it cost to just stand still and survive. By the door, a little black boy looked up at his father and whispered, "I want to be like him." The father didn't speak, just nodded, held the boy's shoulder tight. Somewhere in that silence, the real verdict landed, not from the bench, but from the people who'd spent years pretending not to see what was always in front of them. And when I looked back one last time, the judge didn't meet my eyes. Couldn't. Not because I was defiant, but because now he saw himself. You want to talk about justice? About dignity? It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just rises and stands out. If this story moved you, take a second to like, share, and comment below to do you think justice only works when power's involved? Or do you believe some truths are loud enough to shake a system just by standing still? Let's talk. It's funny. People thought the story ended when I walked out of that courtroom. Like justice had been served, the gavel fell, curtains closed. But real stories, they don't wrap up with a clean bow. They spill. They echo. They knock on doors that used to stay shut. And mine was just getting started. 2 days after the trial, I got a call. Unknown number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something about that silence on the other end, it wasn't empty. It was loaded. A woman's voice finally spoke, calm, clipped, professional. "Mr. Dawson, this is Special Investigator Marla Chun. You need to come in." "Come in for what?" I asked. "We believe your case is part of a wider pattern." Officer Dwyer wasn't working alone. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. Because in my gut, I already knew. They flew me to D.C. Quiet flight. No press. Just a seat by the window and the kind of ache that sits deep in your chest when you realize you're not the only one. Inside a gray, windowless conference room, I met 3 other men. All black. All vets. All former defendants of cases dismissed quietly after video evidence mysteriously vanished. Different towns. Different years. But same pattern. Same silence. One of them, Marcus, had lost custody of his daughter because of Dwyer's statement. Another, Isaiah, spent 14 months in county jail waiting for trial before the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. But no one ever apologized. No one explained. Just moved on like nothing happened. The investigator handed me a file thick as a Bible. Dozens of names. Dozens of sealed complaints, all connected to one precinct. One chain of command. "This," she said, "is bigger than Dwyer." And right then, I realized the courtroom was never the final battlefield. It was just the first one the public could see. We fought different this time. Not with cameras or speeches. With records. With patterns. With the truth, cold, undeniable, and sharp as glass. The twist? The judge, Whitmore. Turns out he'd dismissed a dozen similar complaints against officers tied to Dwyer over the last decade. Cases where footage failed, where testimony was inconclusive. His signature was on every ruling. But here's the kicker. 3 weeks before my trial, he'd received an internal advisory warning about corruption within the precinct. And ignored it. Ignored it. Not because he didn't believe it, but because believing it would have required doing something. But that's when I got angry. Not just about what they did to me, but about how many people they let it happen to just to keep the system smooth, uninterrupted, pristine on the surface while rotten underneath. So yeah, we went public that I didn't want to. God knows I didn't need the cameras again. But some stories? They demand light. I sat on that interview couch, looked dead into the lens, and said, I was ready to die in combat zones for this country. But I wasn't ready to be treated like a threat in my own home. And I damn sure wasn't ready to stay quiet. The clip went viral. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't. Because the calmness of my words burned hotter than any outrage. 2 weeks later, Whitmore resigned. Claimed health reasons, but everyone knew. His name stopped being whispered in marble halls and started trending under hashtags. The DA's office opened an internal review. Dwyer? He vanished from the force. No badge, no pension, just gone. And while part of me wanted to celebrate, a bigger part of me thought about Marcus's little girl. About the jail time Isaiah couldn't get back. About every name in that thick-ass file, and the silence they'd been forced to wear. This wasn't closure. It was a reckoning. Then came the moment that shook me to my core. I was speaking at a small school in Atlanta, invited to talk about service, resilience, the usual. Afterward, a boy, maybe 10, same age as the one in court, walked up to me, eyes wide. "You used to be in jail?" he asked. I smiled, knelt down. "No, not jail. I was in court." He frowned. "They said court is where bad people go." I took a breath, real slow, and said, "Sometimes. But sometimes, it's where good people go to remind the system what right looks like." He nodded like he understood more than most adults ever will. Then he handed me a folded paper. It was a drawing, me, in handcuffs, standing in front of a big building with fire behind it. But at the top, in crooked handwriting, it said, "Truth don't need to shout." That broke me a little, because in that moment, I realized the system didn't win. Not because it fell apart, but because we made it look at itself. And that is more dangerous than any verdict. See, dignity isn't about medals. It's not about walking free. It's about walking true. And some truths, they echo louder in silence than any gavel ever could. So when people ask me now, "Tarek, do you regret not shouting sooner?" I tell them, nah, I didn't need to shout. I just needed to stand still long enough for the world to hear itself. And that's how change begins. What do you think? Does justice require noise, or can the truth whisper its way into history? Drop your thoughts below, because silence isn't always consent. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of something louder.